So welcome everybody to right now the talk on advanced database development with Visual Studio Code. In case you fell asleep during the keynote, this one's over. Now this is the talk. But thank you. Yeah, you have 2 seconds to get out. If that's not what you want to hear, then the doors will be locked. All right. Nevertheless, I'll get started. So what we wanted to show you a little bit today is what you maybe do or do not know, I don't know, that we do have a few tools right now in Visual Studio Code, which is, as we know, a quite popular IDE these days. And yeah, so the idea is to tell you a little bit what we have right now, what's doable, and then also what's to come. Now, a quick history, in case you don't know, what the HANA tooling looks like. So we started off with HANA Studio, and I assume most of you will have used it or at least heard of it. This was the initial tooling for HANA 1 on-premise, an Eclipse-based tool that contained both the administration tooling and the developer tooling. And then, you know, when the whole switch to the cloud started happening and microservice architectures became a thing, it was decided that, well, it's great to have everything running in the database. There are certain scalability issues and, yeah, also deployment issues when it comes to microservices, blue-green deployment and all of that. And so the decision was made to split the application runtime for HANA into its own application server. And so the whole thing was branded SAP HANA XSA, XS Advanced. And with that came also a switch in tooling. So XS Advanced is now a server that's kind of like Cloud Foundry. And all the tooling was also then ported to XSA. And specifically, since we're talking mostly about developer or runtime tooling, the developer tooling switched from HANA Studio now to SAP Web IDE. And yeah, this is still the case for on-premise. At some point, the Web IDE was also ported to the cloud, right? So running and you were able to also develop in the cloud for the cloud. But you know, things constantly change. So at some point, it was decided, well, Web IDE is actually it's kind of nice. And it's also based on open source Eclipse projects. There are certain disadvantages of it. So for one, the control that you have in Web IDE is sort of limited. And also there was never a really big community around Web IDE. And so the team looked around to see, you know, what is there in the developer community at the moment? So what could we maybe adopt? And the decision that was made back then is to look into Visual Studio Code, because that was, I think, 5 years ago. Back then, Visual Studio Code was also quite popular already and still is today. So the decision made back then was actually quite valid. And this is why then SAP Business Application Studio was created, which is a package. The front end, the IDE, is actually basically Visual Studio Code. And it comes also with what's called dev spaces, which are sort of small virtual machines in the cloud, where you have full control over, for example, the file system, the tools you can install. And since it's based on Visual Studio Code, there's actually quite a few third-party extensions that you can install if you need them. Right, so this is where we are today, essentially. So this is the default IDE for HANA Cloud in the cloud. And now the interesting part is, since Business Application Studio is built on Visual Studio Code, you know, why not build for Visual Studio Code and then run it in both places? And that's exactly what we did. So all the HANA tools in Business Application Studio actually built as Visual Studio Code extensions. And as such, they could technically be run in a standalone Visual Studio Code. And so I said could and technically, because, you know, Business Application Studio is more than just a plain Visual Studio Code. It actually comes with a nice package of supporting extensions. And those are not yet available in Visual Studio Code, which is why we cannot make the full set of developer tools available in Visual Studio Code at the moment. Nevertheless, we started. And yeah, and this is basically what we want to talk about today. What we do have today, and these are actually screenshots from the Visual Studio Code Marketplace. is mainly three extensions that we provide. The one is the SAP HANA Database Explorer extension. And as the name suggests, it provides more or less the functionality that the Database Explorer in the cloud provides. We're not 100% there yet, but we're working towards it. And that's basically the end goal, to be able to give the full option to either use the cloud-based tool or the one in Visual Studio Code. And to make this connection also a bit stronger, we built it that the Visual Studio Code extension can also actually talk or use the database connections that you have in the cloud. Right? So ideally, eventually, you'll have the full flexibility which tool to use, whatever fits your use case best. And in addition, we have two other extensions on the Visual Studio Code Marketplace, and both integrate with the Database Explorer extension. The first one is the SQL Analyzer tool, and this is mainly used for analyzing SQL queries, right? So if you have a query that's maybe slow or you don't understand what's happening, you generate a plant trace, and then you can analyze this visually in Visual Studio Code. And the third extension, which I'll hopefully be able to show later a little bit, is the supportability tools. The use case here is, as the name suggests, supportability. So if you have an issue in HANA, and you want to figure out what's going on, typically what you do is you create a full system info dump, and this supportability tools extension will help you analyze this in a nice graphical way and help with the analysis of issues. All right. Yeah, so just to give you a quick overview, and also so that you have the slides later. The Database Explorer extension, like I mentioned, main feature is you have your database connection management, so you can add new connections or you can reuse them from the Database Explorer. And what's also possible is, so if you have an Access Advanced system, we also built it that you can reuse the connections that you have on your Access Advanced system if you connect to it. Yeah, so we have the database list, we have the catalog browser. You'll see all that in a minute. There's a SQL console, right? Also quite important if you want to execute SQL and figure out what's going on. So that's possible. We have metadata dialogues for, at the moment, the most important database artifacts, right? So you can click on a table and it shows you in a nice graphical way the properties of the table. And we also have a dependency viewer. So if you want to see, you have an object and you want to know what does it depend on in the database and what does the object tree look like, then you can also use that. Like I said, the SQL Analyzer used if you have issues with one or more queries, right? You can create a plan graph, and then as you can already see here, there's a nice graphical view on a timeline, and which operators get used, and yeah, so you can analyze what's going on in the database. You can compare queries, right? So to figure out which one is better and why. And there's also a collaboration functionality. So you have a plan graph, you can add comments, you can send it to somebody else, they can see the comments and add their own. And so you can, collaboratively analyze the performance. And like I said, the supportability tools, two main features. One is the offline analysis. Basically, you have a full system info dump and want to know what's going on. So you add it to the supportability tools and you can look at the traces, threads and call stacks, statistics, and all the different dumps that HANA can produce. And there's also an online analysis part. You can get, what statements are currently running in my database. You can, again, create plant traces and also look at the object dependency. All right, so much for the introduction. And now I'll hand over to Thomas, who will do a demo of all of this so you can get a better impression of what it looks like.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
I think you have to end the presentation. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, hello, I'm Thomas. I will now give you a quick demo of the Database Explorer extension in Visual Studio Code. So, you can see in my terminal, I already logged into Cloud Foundry to make it quicker. And we'll now see the main view on the left-hand side. Readable. Make it a bit bigger. Okay, let's focus on the database list first. So it first of all shows the categories, local connections, and the Database Explorer connections. And as Jonathan already mentioned, the Database Explorer connections are the same as in the cloud. So when communicating with them, it will also go through the cloud backend. And for local connections, it will just use the HANA client to create the connection directly. Okay, let's dive into this list view. So first of all, we can filter it. For example, just display databases with VS Code in their name. The classic. Just this way. That was not supposed to happen.
Of course it was. It was to show that this is actually a live demo. We're not just showing videos.
Exactly. Yeah, we can filter the list. And probably more importantly, we can also add a database. We click on it. It will ask us to which destination we want to add the connection. So we can either add a local database or we can add it directly to the Database Explorer connections, and it will then also be available in the cloud backend. Let's click on local connections for now. Don't need the terminal. So we see a little form for adding the database information, and it probably looks familiar to most of you. It is the same data as usual, the host port. You can also, if you don't want to use the UI, or if you have your database connection details already in JSON format, you can input it as JSON, or you can use the UI. And it also supports advanced options if you want to change your database locale. And there are a couple of different database types supported. So SAP HANA Cloud, you can connect to on-premise HANA. You can then also authenticate by using the Kerberos authentication system or the database user. And last but not least, we can add an HDI container, which will have also ask for the HDI user and password. And what's pretty neat is we can now directly select one from the Cloud Foundry connections and add it to our local connections. So we're not relying on the Database Explorer backend anymore. So let's just take the first one, give it the display name, and add it. I don't know the user. Sorry, something's not working right now. Usually it should then read the credentials automatically, assuming they are already stored in Cloud Foundry and the database. But luckily we have already other databases. So we can open a SQL console on a database, which is one of the main points of this extension. And this SQL console is actually the same one that is being used in HANA Cloud Central. So it might look familiar to some of you. Just some buttons look differently because of the style sheets of the environment. And here users have the opportunity to use also file management. So opening files, simple query here. And saving it as a copy, for example, which obviously is in the web version not existing because there you don't have a file system to store it. Okay, so save the copy of the file. Besides that, you can switch the schema, assuming you have permissions for some other schemas. And you can also switch the database connection. So it's basically the same list as on the left-hand side. And just go to database, stored credentials. Okay. Besides that, we have a syntax help panel on the right-hand side. So if we have a select query here, it will give us the exact syntax we can use. And it also shows us, not used to such a small screen. It also shows us the tables that are mentioned in our statement, as well as their columns and the data type of the columns. Also have some instance information. So we can see the HANA version, the host name, port, and the current user. And we have some settings. So the settings here only relate to this single SQL console that is open right now. For example, we can change the number of maximum results and the limit for large objects, as well as changing the auto commit setting in case you're doing writing operations. Go here and execute this. So now we only get 5 results. So the results look pretty familiar. We can export them as CSV or fixed text files. And we have a statement history, which recently got improved. So here you can see which statements were executed, how long it took. And in case you're more interested into the details, you can, for example, add the CPU timings to the history so you can see them and compare different queries. And what else can we do? We can also, in the run menu, so we can first of all execute everything, or just a statement or a line if we have multiple statements. And then there's some analyze functions. So let's click on explain plan, and it will display us the SQL execution plan, which is quite simple for this example, but there's also, Jonathan will later show a more complex example, which we will then also analyze in the SQL Analyzer extension. Okay. That's everything for the SQL console. Now let's go back to the database list view. This database. So individual databases can be expanded. And you see the classic tree view that's probably familiar to you from the Database Explorer web version. And we then have the different artifact types. Let's start with tables. And this will display all the tables in this database in the second view here. This is called Catalog Browser. And this again can be filtered by schemas, or you can filter it by the name, like this case you're searching for specific objects. Okay. If you click on a table, it will open the metadata view, and you can see the information about tables like columns, indexes, properties, as well as runtime information. Let's maybe go to a different table. Not sure if it was this. Right here, for example, you can also see the partitions of the table. Going from this view, we also have an open data button, which will directly create a select query for us, open a SQL console, and execute this query. It's nice to not type the query yourself and just click on it. And we also have this functionality, or some more functionalities. If you right click on table objects, for example, we can generate the create statement of this table. In case we want to create a similar table, or we can generate an insert statement so that we just need to put the values inside. And then the metadata view that opens when you left click also is available for some other artifacts. Right now it's functions, procedures, indexes, views, I think synonyms. And let's open another view. So can again see the columns of the view and the create statement. And we can open the data inside this view. Works the same as for table. Okay, so we have one entry. One more picture of the Database Explorer extension I wanted to show is the dependency viewer. So the dependency view can be opened either on an individual artifact or on an entire database. Let's start one artifact. Give it more space. So it's collecting the dependencies of this artifact. We started with the view nest figure, and we see there is some dependency going down here to the sys schema. If we double click, it will be expanded. But yeah, here. Sorry, the screen is really small. So the nest view depends on dummy, and we can now also click on this object and set it as a new root object. So it will calculate the dependencies in a different direction. And since we got way too many data points with both directions right now, we can switch the dependency direction. For example, to used by dummies or core element right now. So we only see the 5 elements that depend on dummy. Now, if we can expand schema. Is set this as root object, and now let's go in the okay. Well, I hope you got the idea. Something is not working here. Okay, but that was the dependency viewer. And now I will hand back over to Jonathan again for the demo of the SQL analyzer and the supportability tools.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're pretty good in time. So what I'll show you is just what Thomas already hinted at, is the integration of the the SQL analyzer into the SQL console. So let's say I have a very important query like select star from tables, right? So we can see that it actually runs, great. And now what I can do is I can say, okay, let's analyze this plan because I want to know how it works because it's such a complicated query. Yeah, so let's hit the button. And as you can see, it's now executing the SQL analyze action. So it's talking to the database, executing the query. And since I've already installed the SQL Analyzer extension, it already downloads the plan and opens it in the extension. And this is what I have here now. So maybe let's make this a bit bigger. All right, so now what am I looking at? So this is essentially the query that I executed. As I can see here, if I go to the SQL tab, right, I have select star from tables, awesome. And I can get a few info about the session context and parameters, which I don't have any. And then if I want to look at the plan, what happened in the background, already looking at the timeline here and seeing what's happening, this already looks a bit more complex than just select star from tables. And so if I want to maybe get a feeling of what the HANA does in the background for this relatively simple query, one thing to always look at is, let's look at the graph. That should hopefully be quite intuitive. All right, and now what I can see is, so here's my row search, and let's maybe scroll to the bottom. All right, so what actually happened for this relatively simple query, right? So there's two table scans at the bottom. One is for RS tables, so the row store tables, and the other one is for CS tables. Okay, makes sense, right? So we have two kinds of tables. So if I select all tables, I probably want information on both. And what you can see over here as well is also virtual tables is queried, right? Because those are also tables. And what's also interesting, as you can see, right? So for virtual tables, you can see, there was one row that was found. So apparently I have one virtual table in the system. As you can also here see visually, the CS, the column store tables are actually the biggest contributor to this query. Right? I have about 160,000 of those, and then fewer row tables. And then there's some indexes and things being joined, being materialized in the end. And in the end, there's a union across all of these different tables, and then it gives me the final result. Yeah, I don't really want to go in depth. It's just an overview, but you can see for each of these nodes, what type of operation it is. You can get the ID, the execution time, inclusive and exclusive, a summary, the used CPU time, where the query was executed, and So if you want to look at what a query does, this is a very good place to get started. And like I said, down here you can get also a timeline view, right? So what happened at what point, and you can see, okay, these three apparently we're waiting now for the lower ones to do something. Right. And you can look at the operators. You can also click here and it jumps to the operator in the graph. So if you have found something interesting here, either, something that took a lot of CPU time, you can look at it. Okay, apparently it's this one, which is again not surprising because it had to process the most rows. So I guess it's fine that it takes the most CPU time. Right, and these are the kind of things, if you're interested in what a query actually does, that you can do. Right, and there's more, right? Sometimes, if there's recommendations how to improve the queries, you can see them here. Yeah, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, my query is too simple, so most of these things are empty now. But if you have more complex queries, this is actually a very good place to get started and figure out what's going on. All right. On the SQL view, you can actually, for example, also rerun the query. So you can click run. You get the whole session context that we saw on this page before. So if you want to, you can change something and maybe, play around with different applications or users or I don't know. So if you have a suspicion that maybe the application user is causing something in some check to go slow, you can change it and then just click run. It'll ask you, where do you want to run it, right? So you choose one of the connections from Database Explorer, and then it just reruns the same thing, and so you can iterate over changes to your query. All right, and here's the re-executed plan. Since I didn't change anything, the whole thing looks pretty similar to the one I had, but you get the idea. You can make slight changes and see how the plan behaves. All right. Yeah, that's basically, I would say, the main feature. Oh, I mentioned the collaboration feature, right? Here you have the comments feature. So you're supposed to enter a name and an address. I'm just going to leave this. But then, you can just add comments. Okay, apparently I'm not going to leave this. It's very persistent here. Oh, real address. Right, and then yeah, you can search for comments. You can add comments, and like I said, once you're done, you can export the whole thing, and then send it to a colleague and say, hey, look, here's the plan. I don't really understand what's going on, but I added some comments. Can you please take a look? And then you can add more comments and send it back, and so you can collaboratively analyze the issues and hopefully then figure out what's not working for you. Okay, last thing I'm going to quickly show is the supportability tools, right? So that I also mentioned. So this is just, since we're almost out of time, right? So you have work folders. I already created one for me where I imported a full system info dump. And as you can see, you can expand it. You can already look at the traces. So there's the index server traces. There's also some runtime dumps. If you open them, you get sort of a nice viewer, right? So it's not just a plain trace file, but it's a bit structured. You get some analysis, and then this is hopefully helpful to get to the root cause faster than just looking at the runtime dump itself. What you can do is you can also open an analysis page for the full system info dump. And here it shows you, first of all, the different files that it might be interesting, right? So I have a crash in there and 2 out of memories. And again, for the crash, you get the information for the OM dump is basically the same that we saw right now. You get the same view. You can look at the threads and call stacks of the individual threads that were going on at the moment. You can, filter by the active one. You can also show including the inactive ones. And, there's more filters that you can add, like, for example, only if there's SQL or, if something's running. And so you can drill down and analyze the info dump and also then hopefully figure out what's going on. So this is all the offline analysis, right? So this, for example, here shows you also the heap memory, what was allocated in which allocator. If you remember the slides, there's also the online analysis. And this is up here, right? So you can open the statement overview. And, well, apparently I have insufficient privileges. Yeah, I should have tried this. It works on my machine anyway. So if you have enough privileges, let's see. Yeah, I can try to disconnect and then reconnect. Anyway, don't have enough time for this, so you just got to believe me or look at the documentation. But here you can actually look in the database and you can see what the type of thing that you can see. The top SQL statements that are currently being executed, expensive statements, all executed statements, the active statements, and also plan traces again. All right, and with that, since we have only a few minutes left, I think we'll stop here. If you have any questions about... I'm trying. Oop. See, there we go.
Okay.
Never use somebody else's computer. Okay. In the slides, I have all the references to the extensions that you saw with links and some supporting extensions that might be useful. And so, yeah, with that, here's also our contact details. If you have questions later and or ideas what we could improve, then let us know. And yeah, with that, I'll open up for questions if there are any.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Jonathan and Thomas, for this insightful session. So do we have any questions in the... Perfect. Like, that's an easy throw for me. Otherwise, I'm going to hit people likely. And there you go. Keep it tight.
Thank you very much for the session and for this extension. I really love it. I use it a lot. But I always wonder about this SQL console, why you don't use the native text editor for just writing queries. It will be a little bit more natural, but yeah, otherwise I love it. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, first of all, Thomas mentioned, right, that we try to reuse things as much as possible. And since HANA Cloud Central already has the SQL console, it was sort of natural to also add it to VS Code. And, to get things like the statement help, like the connection switching, all of that, we would have to re-implement if we use the text editor. And text editors are also sort of limited, right? So if you can't really add this menu bar with the different run options and all of that. We could have it, in the command bar as via some shortcut or something. But yeah, we decided it's basically easier also from an implementation perspective, and we can make faster progress if we reuse what's already there. And so we're reusing it.
All right. There is the next one.
Thank you very much. On HANA on-prem, we used to install 10 years ago. I used to use a tool utility nmon to check the core usage. Is there anything similar in your HANA Cloud? Thank you.
That's a good question. I'm not aware of anything similar in HANA Cloud because you don't really have the same type of access to HANA Cloud, right? And so, yeah, at the moment, I don't think we have that.
Maybe something for a deep dive conversation later on, as Jonathan and Thomas will also be upstairs in our expert corner. But we have time for more questions. Oh, that's far away. So I'm doing that one first. Oh, pay attention. Oh, yeah, there you go. Almost hit Christoph.
Hi, thanks. Very interesting session. Can you elaborate a bit about when to use a local connection versus proxying via the web one? And
yeah. So it depends on the use case, right? So local connections are stored in the VS Code workspace, right? So they're tied to your machine and your VS Code workspace. So if you want to be able to use the same connection from different machines, then one in the cloud or in this proxy would be beneficial for you. If you say, I have my local machine anyway, which I always work on, and, it's fine to have the connection definition just on that machine, then I would say go with the local connection because, yeah, it omits this one proxy run. And so it's usually a bit more responsive.
Okay, go ahead. All right, that was more down there. So I'm running. Let's see. Yeah.
Thanks. Just one follow-up with the SQL console, because maybe there is still something to do there, since I have some very complicated SQL stuff with basically breaks. I think it's probably syntax analysis, syntax highlighting, whatever, because I then also have to do quite often the reload window as soon as I paste the big SQL. That's breaking very often.
Yeah, of course, it should work for all kinds of queries. If you have some examples, then it would be interesting to see them and the behavior. We recently fixed at least one bug that could cause high CPU load. Maybe it's already better now. But yeah, I would suggest come to the expert corner afterwards, and then we can take a look at the query.
Okay, yes. Perfect.
Yeah. Of course, we want all queries to work there. So
I think the next one was over here, and then we go back that direction.
Thank you for the interesting session. One question, is there any timeline available for more features like data exploration, slice and dice, graphical interface to exploring the data from the table, not only to create a select statement and see it in a normal format? Also, is there any development interfaces planned so that I also can develop some calculation views or other database artifacts on Visual Studio Code?
Yeah. So, for the roadmap, you can look at the HANA Cloud roadmap. So we publish what we're planning in the next quarters there. If you have concrete requirements, right, we should discuss them. What exactly you're expecting with, you mentioned slicing and dicing, right? So everybody, has a different meaning of that. We have just added, at least for analytical data previews, we have added a new data preview viewer. So if you have a calc view, you can now open it and then do some analytics on the calc view. But yeah, for everything else, I think we need some requirements and then discuss with product management. What's the second question? Sorry.
What is the development?
Development, yes. Development right now, like I said, is in Business Application Studio, and we're working on getting everything also in Visual Studio Code. But like I said, we have some dependencies on extension that Business Application Studio provides out of the box that are not available in Visual Studio Code yet. But we're working on it, and hopefully rather sooner than later, we can provide the rest of the tools in Visual Studio Code as well.
Thank you very much. Definitely encouraged me to make more use of the very nice extensions. And my question is, are there any, I very much like the ability to debug procedures live. Is there anything common in the extension?
Not at the moment. This is still something in our plan. I don't have a timeline yet, but it's definitely something that we'll also port to VS Code eventually, since VS Code actually has some nice infrastructure with debuggers. And so, yeah, we have it in our backlog, but at the moment, I don't have a timeline yet.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, in the interest of time, let's wrap it up again. Thanks a lot to Jonathan and Thomas for this great session.